So if you are growing onions for the first time and you are overwhelmed and frustrated because you don't know when to harvest them or how to store them, don't worry, I've got you covered. I have been growing onions for quite a few years in my small but mighty garden, and this is my best onion harvest yet. I'm going to share my entire process with you, show you how to harvest them. Stay tuned until the end because I'm going to share my favorite method for storing them, and it's not the braiding that everybody else does. There are different types of onions. The two that I'm going to mention today are the storage varieties, which are the pungent varieties, and the fresh eating varieties, which we call the sweet ones. Some of the common pungent varieties are the Red Wing, Candy, Copra, and there's another one that I did this year, which is a Rosa di Milano, which is an Italian heirloom. The thing about the pungent onions is they store well. That is really important if you want to keep your onions all the way through the winter. Conversely, the fresh eating onions, the sweet onions, those are like the Spanish onions, the Walla Wallas, the Ailsa Crags, I don't know if I said that right, and my husband's favorite, the Round de Tropea, which I'm sure I didn't say right. And if you have failed before at storing your onions, it could be that you used a sweet variety. And if that's the case, you probably ended up with a leaking pile of goo. Ask me how I know, because I have been there and got the t-shirt. Choosing the right variety is key. This year I did the Red Wing, don't mind the Blue Jay. I did the Red Wing and the Rosa di Milano, and they turned out amazing. I started these back in the winter, and all of them I grew from seed. I'll show you guys what's going on in the beds, and then we will talk about how to know when to harvest them. This was the Rosa di Milano bed. I have already picked a bunch of these, and they're downstairs curing. They're really cool shaped onion. We'll pick some of those in a minute, and I will show you. This bed over here is the Red Wing. This is what you're going to want to look for when your onions are getting ready to harvest, which is usually around midsummer when the bulbs start to fatten up. You'll see that the necks start going soft, and then the onions just naturally start folding over. When you start to see this with a bunch of them, which you can see almost all of mine have already fallen over, there's still a couple that are standing up tall like this guy, and what you can do is you just come and you bend the neck over. So this will help get them ready for storage and start telling the onions that it's time, you're done, which is exactly what we want so that they will store well. Another thing you're going to want to keep in mind is you're definitely going to want to harvest your onions when it is dry and they are not wet at all, because that is another thing that could lead to rotting when you want to put them into storage. When you're harvesting on a warm day, all of those sugars get concentrated, which is exactly what we want. If you're looking for an onion for dinner, you can definitely start to harvest individual onions around midsummer once they've got a bulb. When you're looking for storing them over the winter, you want to wait longer until the late summer into the early fall when they've really started to flop over naturally. So once all of your onions are flopped over either on their own or with your help, then you want to leave them for about another week just to make sure that the skins start to dry up. So when you're harvesting your onions, you're going to want to keep as much of the foliage, the stalks, and leaves attached. And this really helps to increase your chance that they're not going to rot. We want all of the skins at the top of the bulb to really tighten up and seal in that onion so that it is protected. That is a lot of talk. Let me show you guys the process, and then we'll take them downstairs to start off the curing process. We have our basket. All I'm going to do is I'm grabbing as far down as I can, giving them a bit of a twist and pulling them out. There we go. One beautiful onion. You want to make sure you don't bang them about too much, so just be gentle with them because that could also lead to rotting once they go into storage. And then once these are all out, I'm going to amend in here with some compost, and then this is actually where I will be planting my garlic. So the main thing to remember to know when to harvest your onions is you want to look for the three main things. The necks are getting soft, they're starting to flop over, and some of the leaves are going brown and yellow. Curing is a really important step to have your onions last a long time in storage. So the whole point of the curing process is really to give the outside layers of the onion the time to dry. Luckily, this is a really simple process, and one of the main important things you have to remember is to allow for good air circulation. So you can go ahead and put a fan on. You don't have to though, but as long as you've got space between the onions so that they can properly dry out, that's pretty much all you need. I really like using this metal shelf because then I can just feed all the foliage through and just leave it there, and it's got pretty good air circulating around it. Another way to cure them is people people will lay them on their sides like this, but especially if they're on a flat surface, you're going to want to make sure to rotate them every day to help with that air circulation. And I do the same thing for all of my garlic. So the ideal temperature for curing the onions is going to be like 24 to 27 degrees Celsius or 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. One of the main reasons that I like to cure my onions inside like this is then I don't have to worry about the weatherman being correct, because if you are curing them outside, you want to make sure that there's no chance of frost or rain coming, because you want to keep them dry, and you want to make sure that if you are curing them outside, that they are kept out of direct sunlight. Once your onions get to this point and the skins are all dried and the neck is nice and tight around that bulb, you can go ahead and trim off any of the roots, and then the foliage needs to be all dry. If you are not going to braid or to string your onions, you can go and cut off the foliage about an inch above the bulb. If you're going to string or braid, then you're going to want to make sure you leave the foliage intact. So most people talk about braiding their onions for storage, and I have tried it, but I have found that stringing onions is actually easier. Now, if you are a die-hard onion braider, then you do you and keep braiding those onions. But if this is your first time putting onions up for storage, you might actually find that this method is easier for you. So I wanted to share it so you could try it out. So once your onions are done curing and they look like this, you'll see all of the greens have gone brown and they are all dried out, and the neck should be nice and tight. This is when you're going to be ready to start either braiding or stringing your onions. So I have cut some pieces of string and hung them up on some hooks out here. So you're going to want the piece of string or twine or whatever you are using to be about 2 to 3 feet long, and you're going to tie it into a loop. I have it up on some handy dandy hooks. It's easier if it's about eye level, because then you just can work with it a bit easier, I found, but wherever you want to hang it. Now what I should say is some people talk about already cutting it off and then just using it with a little bit. It does get a little bit unruly having the whole stem, but I just prefer to leave it so I know that I have options. I always worry about cutting it too short, so this way I know it's not going to be too short, and then I just trim off the ends after it's up there, and I'll show you what I do. You're going to take the onion, you're going to put it through, then you're going to take the stem and wind it around, and then I pull it down, and that's it. We have our first onion. And then you're just going to keep alternating with the onions, putting it through, winding it round, and sticking it back. I actually find it kind of therapeutic, and you just kind of get into a zone and just string away. And see, they're all just alternating, and then you just hang them up. Let's see if we can do this up close. You take the onion, you put the stem through the string, snug it up, and then take the stem, wrap it around, and then pull it back through, and that will just help lock the onions into place. I'll do one more. We'll snug it into place, feed the stems through, twist it around and back through, and then just put the stems down. And then you just keep going all the way up, and then all of these loose bits of stems, I'll just trim them off afterwards. When I want an onion, I will just go down and just give it a couple twists, and it pops right off. So once you are done stringing or braiding all of your onions, you're going to want to take them into a cool, dark place. Air circulation is going to be key, which is why I like this method as well. Air can get all around them. So not only does having good air circulation prevent rotting, but it also helps the onions to maintain their flavor. If you are not going to braid or string your onions, and you're going to want to get a mesh bag to keep them in, I'll put a link down below to where you can get some mesh bags here in Canada. If you have used the right kind of onion and you have stored it properly and you have good air circulation and you've cured it, these things can last for 10 to 12 months sometimes, which should get you right until your next harvest is coming out of the ground. In comparison to those sweet or fresh eating onions, those are only going to last for a few weeks, and then they're going squishy, and ain't no one got time for that. I really hope this video has been helpful and you are feeling more confident about harvesting and curing and storing your onions, and that you will go forth and have a bountiful onion harvest.